Hello everyone, we're coming up on a new year, and I figured since we haven't had any real announcements for Fire Emblem recently, I'd put together a list of things I think would be cool to see in 2022. A wish list, if you will. I'm obviously not expecting Nintendo, Intelligent Systems, Koei Tecmo, or whoever else to do all the things I'm about to describe, but humor me. I just want something in the upcoming year that's not just Fire Emblem Heroes. Not trying to throw shade or anything, I just try to stay away from mobile gaming on principle. But enough of that, let's start. I'll get the most obvious item out of the way first. It's been what, 2.5 years now since Three Houses was released? I don't know about you, but I think it's high time for a new entry to the series. They could go one of two ways with this, and keep in mind I'm not accounting for any online rumors or anything. One option would be a brand new game with a brand new story, and the other would be a remake, and I would be a-okay with either of those. If they made an entirely new game, there are plenty of great directions they could take, whether they start with a clean slate or if they revisit settings from prior games. My only concern here is I hope they don't try to make a direct sequel to Three Houses, since they probably either have to pick one of the 4 routes to consider canon, or otherwise commit to making 4 separate sequels at some point. A prequel could potentially work, maybe a story covering some of the events in the 1,000 years between the death of Nemesis and Byleth's birth, perhaps even a game centered around the exploits of a young Captain Geralt. Could be cool, you never know. But now I'm getting off track. If they went with a remake, the most obvious picks would either be Genealogy of the Holy War or The Binding Blade. Out of these two, I definitely prefer Genealogy, though I certainly wouldn't complain if it were The Binding Blade. I just think the story of Genealogy is one that every Fire Emblem fan needs to experience, and it would pair nicely with Three Houses as far as aesthetic, mechanics, and story are concerned. It's also in much greater need of an update gameplay-wise. Plus, a Genealogy remake would open up the door for a 3CS776 remake down the road. But again, I'd be cool with a Binding Blade remake too, and like Genealogy, it could also use some updating. I'd definitely like to see the developers address some things like the janky character imbalance and RNG issues. At the very least, our boy Roy could use a stat buff in an earlier promotion. I've also heard people online float the idea of Tellius remakes, but I personally wouldn't want those remade yet, since I'd rather see the Japan-only titles remade first. However, I do concede that accessibility to the Tellius games is still a problem. I mean, just one scroll through eBay will show you how difficult it is to get your hands on those games. So, I have another solution. Over this past summer, I played the HD re-release for The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, and boy was it refreshing in comparison to its Wii counterpart. In fact, it was so nice, I played it twice. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the Wii version when it came out, I most certainly did, but the controls on the Switch, plus some of the other changes made it such a smoother, more welcoming experience. Because of this, I think Path of Radiance would be the perfect candidate if they were to re-release Fire Emblem games like this, with Radiant Dawn coming sometime after. It could patch up some of the pacing issues like battle animations, gameplay speed, and so on, and I'd like to see them make it so that you can have more than just 5 supports per unit, among some other smaller changes. And obviously it would fix the accessibility issue. But if we want to talk about accessibility, we also need to address one other Fire Emblem title whose story, despite having received a remake, never got released outside of Japan. But if I'm not putting this game into the remake section, and if an HD re-release wouldn't work, how could we handle it? And what game is this anyway? Well, let me tell you. Yes, much like they did last year with the first official localization of Fire Emblem 1, I'd like to see them give the same treatment to the third game of the series, Mystery of the Emblem. Again, this is a game that has already received a remake, but neither version was ever released outside of Japan. And given how Marth is the face of the series, you'd think that his second, and by some accounts superior story would have been made available internationally by now. Plus, many players still consider the remake's addition of a customizable player avatar controversial to this day. That's a story for another time. So an official localization could easily appeal to series vets as well. And while they're at it, they should go ahead and bring back the FE1 localization to the Nintendo eShop. Honestly, I find it almost criminal that they only made it available for 3 months. Oh, and for those curious why I didn't select FE2 for this, it's because it already received a 3DS remake a few years back, and it's still readily accessible, so I'd be fine with waiting longer for that one to be localized. Now for the final item on this list, I figured I'd float this in case they ever added anything more to Three Houses. I don't consider it a priority per se, but it would still be neat. When it comes to Fire Emblem games, I almost always endorse having more levels of difficulty available to the players. To me, it's one of the best ways to allow players of any type to get into these games. Some people like to play on normal mode, some people like to play on hard, some people like the brutality of something like Reverse Lunatic in FE12, and some are even crazy enough to Iron Man 3CS776. And believe it or not, some people prefer Phoenix mode and Birthright on the lowest difficulty, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I'd like to see a new difficulty level in Three Houses between hard and maddening. Maybe it's just me, but I never found hard mode very difficult, especially if you're playing on New Game Plus. But then you get to maddening and it's maddening. And for those wanting to try maddening, another difficulty level before it could help them ease their way into it, rather than just getting smacked in the face with it. But other than that, that's all I have for this list. Well, what do you all think? What would you like to see from the Fire Emblem series in the coming year? Do you like my ideas? Do you think my ideas suck? Let me know in the comments. But regardless, have a great new year, and please be responsible when celebrating. See you all in 2022.